Hi everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Fitness Education Series produced by the Australian Fitness Academy. It's like progressive overload for your brain. I'm your host, Tom Rock, and today's episode I want to talk about exercise selection and also sort of rep ranges and how to adjust your rep ranges or potentially consider adjusting your rep ranges for different exercises. And this topic comes off the back of a question from Jake, so shout out Jake. Jake sent me a great email that sort of alluded to this question, and it was a really great email. Jake's a current student, doing really well in his Cert 3, smashing it away. So, yeah, it was a really good question in relation to rep ranges and exercise selection, and it was about, it was in relation to an assessment, but it was looking at hypertrophy and utilizing obviously the hypertrophy rep range of anywhere from 7 to 12 reps probably. For maximizing hypertrophy, and we were sort of looking at whether is it better to do sort of, if we want to say start at like the 7 or 8 reps and then progressively overload and sort of stick to the same weight and slowly progress the number of reps, which is a great way to go for initial progressions. 8 reps might be good, but we sort of looked at, well, is it better to do higher reps for exercises like isolation exercises, such as like a tricep push down or a lateral raise, for example. And I think it opens up a really good discussion about rep ranges and exercises, and looking at how some exercises potentially are more suited to lower rep ranges, and some exercises potentially are more suited to higher rep ranges. And there's no black and white or right and wrong with this at all. You can definitely program a wide variety of reps for any exercise, and it's not inherently wrong. I think it's something to consider when you're programming for beginners, intermediate, advanced, and potentially looking at when you look at programming in a whole and consider recovery between sessions and recovery from sessions. It's important to not only take into account, I guess, that person's fitness levels and how long they have to recover, but also the exercise selection within that session and how that's going to affect their recovery. So I think the deadlift and the squat are really good examples or clear examples of this, as they're quite large compound exercises that use a lot of muscle mass and will take a lot of effort. So if you look at doing an exercise, if you compare, say, let's say a deadlift compared to a bicep curl. If we do 3 sets of 10 deadlifts versus 3 sets of 10 bicep curls, the fatigue created from that and the ability to get through that those exercises is completely different. 3 sets of 10 deadlifts, where you're getting close to failure on each set, is going to be a lot harder to recover from, or take longer to recover from, than 3 sets of 10 bicep curls, which after my 3 sets of 10 bicep curls, I'm up. After a couple of minutes, I probably feel fine. I'm ready to sort of go for a run or do whatever I want for the day. But after 3 sets of 10 deadlifts, where I'm going potentially close to failure each set, with a load that gets me to around the 10 rep range, after those 3 sets, I'm going to feel like my session is done and I'm ready to sort of relax. So it's really something. It is something definitely to consider when you're programming. As I said, there's nothing wrong. You can program for 3 sets of 10 deadlifts, and it's absolutely fine. Just consider the client's goals. The client's training age is also important, and have they built up the tolerance to complete that as a session, and then make sure you're tailoring the intensity as well. If we're doing, as I said, if we're doing close to failure for those 3 sets of 10, that's going to be a very, very exhausting exercise, given that it's such an exercise that involves a lot of different muscle groups within the body. It's going to be very physically taxing. But if we do it at a lighter intensity, not getting as close to failure and using a very manageable weight, it's something we can definitely do, and it's probably going to have more of a cardiovascular, not necessarily cardiovascular, but more that lactic threshold and sort of that full body. You'll probably find you're puffed after doing 3 sets of 10 deadlifts like that, given the outlay of energy. So I think you've got to look at, well, what rep ranges suit different exercises, and you can also look at it from the point of exercise technique and the impact of fatigue, having the ability to make it harder to maintain good technique, which might increase the risk of injury from certain exercises. So the deadlift is another good example, or the back squat. We might have really good form for our first 5 reps, but as we start to get closer to failure, our form starts to break down, whether we have a slightly more rounded spine, we aren't extending the hips and knees at the same rate. Lots of different things. We lose our intra-abdominal pressure, and all these different things can add up the more deeper and deeper we go into higher rep ranges for those bigger lifts. So even if we do a heavier weight for less reps, we might mitigate some of that increased risk of injury due to fatigue, and that's also something to consider. So if we get technique breakdown in the bicep curl, for example, it's not really going to risk. There's no real injury risk unless we're really starting to swing the weight up with our body. But realistically, once we get to a limit in the bicep curl, we're just going to get to a point where we can't lift the weight anymore, and it's not really going to increase the risk of injury. We just can't do it. With the deadlift, certain muscles might give out before others, so we sort of adjust. Our body will automatically adjust our technique to perform the lift, which is maybe not beneficial in terms of the exercise outcome, but also reducing the risk of injury. So definitely another thing to consider. So you might, and same thing, I would say, potentially some exercises, and the lateral raise was one that came up in the discussion, is a really good example from Jake. Is like if you're doing sets of 5 or 6, sometimes a lateral raise, it can be easy for the technique to be quite challenging if you're using a heavy weight. It's sort of unstable. You can might be swinging the dumbbells up a little bit more. You might be using a bit more traps and getting some shrugging motion happening in there just because you're trying to force the weights up. But if you use a more manageable weight, such as in the sort of the 12 rep range or 10 to 12 rep range, you're going to find the technique of that lateral raise is a lot better, and you're probably targeting the delts a little bit more and reducing the risk of maybe injuring or using muscles that you're probably not meant to be or really targeting that exercise. So your technique will be better with a lighter load on, say, something like the dumbbell lateral raise, whereas with a deadlift, you can definitely have great technique with a lighter load or lightish load, but as we get closer to failure, we don't want to risk technique breakdown in those bigger movements such as a deadlift and a squat. So lower reps and a slightly heavier weight can help us mitigate that. Again, it all depends on your client's training age and their ability on certain lifts. So it's definitely not a black and white. It's something to consider when you're programming and instructing clients as a personal trainer or exercise instructor, is consider how your rep range, what it's like, and then how it's affected by the certain exercise they're actually doing. And the more programs you do, the more exercise you do, the more rep ranges and reps and set schemes that you try on certain exercises, the more you'll realize how they feel, the pros of them, the cons of them. And there's great programs with a spectrum. There's definitely some programs out there that'll have you doing 20 rep back squat sets and all these sorts of things. So it's not like you can't, but you've got to consider what's the benefit of going close to failure with a relatively heavy weight on a deadlift or a squat versus sort of managing those reps to maintain good technique the whole way throughout the set. So lots of great things to consider, I think, from that topic from Jake. So thanks for sending that through. If you got any thoughts on this or questions of how it relates to anything, send an email to tom@afa.com.au. I'm happy to do a follow-up or cover off any questions or topics you guys would like me to chat about. But a really, really good topic that sort of expands the programming thoughts beyond just what exercise am I going to do and then sticking the same sets and reps for any exercise depending on what my goal is. You can sort of start to narrow down, well, what's the benefit I'm getting from this exercise? What reps is going to suit this exercise best to get this outcome? So yeah, lots of really, really cool stuff to think of on that. Anyway, guys, hope you enjoyed my thoughts on that. Have a great weekend, and I'll talk to you all soon.